long day with tons of interviews in DC, French TV, everything. So just wiped out.
Yeah, and you've got your reveal tomorrow.
Yes,
the Climate Hustle.
Yeah,
number 2.
Yeah. Yes, thank you.
I first heard I was an on-air meteorologist for 20 years. That was my career, and so I bit the global warming thing hook, line, and sinker. It all kind of made sense. I came into my own at like 88 when I was finishing college, and Yellowstone was blowing up. That was a crazy hot summer. Yeah. And so I bought the thing, and I did the third grader talks. I did all of those elementary school things. I fell for it. And I was working in Tulsa and James Inhofe. And it was a little beginning of there are actually dissenters out there. There's another point of view to this discussion. And that was an aha moment for me. The other moment was then 9/11.
Interesting, 9/11, yeah.
And because then you question the narrative.
Yes.
And once that story wasn't right, then I systematically, being in journalism, went looking through other holes in other stories. And then in time, trails in the skies were creating clouds. That's going to impact temperatures because then 9/11, we had no plane traffic. So atmospheres went transparent. We saw a greater variation, a diurnal swing of 3 degrees. So we took those aerosols out of the sky and the days were warmer and the nights were cooler. So there were a lot of things that came to my eventual conclusion that we're fighting a beast here and there's another agenda behind it. And in your book, you talk about Maurice Strong.
Yes.
I've had dinner with his wife. She lives in this small Colorado town.
Now? You mean years ago?
Right now.
Wow.
Less than 2 miles away.
Okay.
So I've participated in her passionate belief that we need to have this structure in place to help mankind through the changes that are coming. So I'm wondering, why did they just tell us the truth about real climate change? And what do you believe is the real driver, or are we just in a variable cycle at this point in time?
Actually, there's nothing unusual going on. But I mean, you brought up Maurice Strong. Maurice Strong was I guess you'd say, the founder of the first Earth Summit, 1992 in Rio. And George H.W. Bush, then president, went down there, signed the United States onto it, and got us involved in the whole United Nations climate treaty process, led the Kyoto Protocol, the Copenhagen, eventually the Paris Pact, led to the annual conferences, the U.S. sending huge delegates. I went as a Senate staffer to Bali, for a hotel. I'm talking about a 5-star oceanfront hotel with luau's on the beach every night, full shows, palm trees. My airline tickets in Kenya, I went to another one. I mean, we're talking 15, 17,000 round trip just for me as a Senate staffer. You went in style. I'm talking airline pods, first class, where you lay down and sleep. And this is how they travel. It's actually technically business class, but it's like first class. So
it's special business.
But what Maurice Strong did is he started the Agenda 21, the sustainable development. And actually, in doing research for my book now on the Green New Deal, going back and pulling excerpts of the Rio Summit and the original sustainable development, which Nancy Pelosi, by the way, introduced on the House floor in 1992. Actually, it may have been 93 now, but it is verbatim, almost exactly like the Green New Deal. It's basically a complete changeover of society. I interviewed Christina Figueres for Climate Hustle too. She's the former UN climate chief. They seek a centralized transformation that will make life on planet Earth very different. The vice chair of the IPCC said it's not about climate. This is about redistribution of wealth. It's not about environment or policy. So it's interesting. You'd start out talking about Maurice Strong because they've been very clear about what they're seeking. And it has nothing to do with controlling the climate. It's about controlling society. And then, you go back and in my first book, Politically Incorrect Guide to Climate Change, I go in and talked about John Holdren in the 1970s. His big complaint was that people had energy that was too cheap, too abundant. And he actually lamented that some people would get in their car, drive to the store, get a 6-pack and drive home. He saw that as wasteful, unnecessary. And guess what's in the headlines today? California banning the internal combustion engine car by I can't remember the date now, but it just
2035.
First state in the nation to do so.
Yeah.
And then we have, Andrew Yang, Democratic candidate last year, calling for a roving fleet of electrical cars and abolishing. Basically, they want to get rid of private ownership of cars. So it's an amazing thing. So you asked about the climate, but go ahead. I don't want to.
No. That's why you're here. Yeah. But what's fascinating to me is that they chose CO2 as the lever by which to accomplish this political agenda.
And I'll tell you, they failed for one reason. They failed thus far because CO2 is not scary. It's a trace essential gas in the atmosphere. Every poll has showed it's 18th, 19th global warming. People are concerned, but they don't want to do anything about it. They don't want to pay $5 a month.
Yeah.
What could possibly replace CO2? Viral fears. And they have succeeded beyond their wildest dreams with COVID. And so the movie Climate Hustle 2 opens with the COVID climate connection. And I think you'll be shocked because we go through the top United Nations, media, teen activists, Al Gore, John Kerry. They love the lockdowns. They actually say the parallels between the solutions are uncanny. They're unbelievable close. And they love it because at UN summits, they openly talked about planned recessions, degrowth, in order to reduce emissions. What is a lockdown but a government planned recession? That's what we're dealing with. Despite what the evidence one way, this is absolutely, they've succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. So now I think climate, CO2, cannot be the boogeyman they ever thought. Other than this, they are now trying to say, well, uncontrolled CO2 is going to lead to more viruses. They're now forced to become part of the viral fears. They're no longer leading the show. All these climate activists who invested decades, they're watching with jealousy as unelected public health bureaucrats take over. Think of what's going on in Australia, New Zealand. The parliaments have been suspended in Victoria, Australia. You don't even, the elected bodies are gone. And now you have nameless, faceless public health bureaucrats who no one could even name, with a massive police force telling you you're quarantined, you can't leave your house. If you refuse a test, you get double long quarantine. You're taken away from your family. You're arrested. If you say anything on Facebook that says we should maybe go protest, they break into your house. We've got the video. This is where we are, a technocracy ruled by experts. This is what the end game of Maurice Strong was, but I don't think anyone saw it. We melted. And I'll say one last thing and then I'll let you speak, but the UK House of Commons speaker at the G7 summit last week with Nancy Pelosi marveled. I think he said the word amazed at how, quote, compliant, unquote, the public has been with lockdowns and all these restrictions. And now he's excited because he wants to extend them to the climate world. So if you love the COVID lockdowns, you're going to love the climate lockdowns. This is what we're facing right now. It's one of the darkest moments in freedom we've ever faced, I think, as a country, absent, getting rid of slavery and fighting segregation and some of those battles.
Well, it's become politicized. So one side can't, how do we say this, talk about the issue without the other saying it's just a political issue rather than a healthcare issue. It's the same with weather and with climate, those that are without bias don't get to do the science and have the point of view to be able to talk to the public.
And that's what our movie's about. We profile scientist after scientist who were smeared, lost their jobs, all because they dared dissent. And here's a simple concept. Science has become another branch of the government. It is politicized, whether you're talking about mask studies, climate studies. I'll give you two quick examples. President Obama was headed off, and we cover this in the movie, into the UN climate summit in Paris for the Paris Pact. This was supposed to be the savior of the world. By the way, it didn't save the world. Within 2 years, they were talking about it being inadequate. We're all doomed. We have new tipping points. So no matter how many times they pat themselves on the back and say they the world, it doesn't happen. But Obama needed something grand and dramatic. So he goes to NOAA scientists, and what do? They bring out a rush through peer review federal study saying that global warming pause is no more. They went back and changed the past temperatures. Imagine you're a company losing money. You hire a new accountant. Hey, guess what? We went from being in the red to the black. We're making record profits. We have a new accountant. We changed all our old numbers. That's what they did with the global temperature history. So Obama goes to the UN Paris Agreement with this piece of paper study saying the pause is no more. And then the media is like, the climate deniers lost their talking point. Doesn't matter whether the study was accurate. They rushed it through peer review. No one could question it. Now, fast forward, since the 1970s, 80s, on my website, if you go to climatedepot.com, mask studies, as an example, Not only were they not effective in preventing a virus, but many of the studies showed that people who wore masks in medical settings had higher rates of influenza and other viruses because you're messing with your mouth, you're constantly touching, adjusting. It was never in the CDC playbook to have mandatory masks. It was never in the World Health Organization. So what happens? We have the first wave of COVID come in, March and April. Death toll drops down to 90%. And then government, state after state, blue state typically, was issuing mask mandates. So what are you going to do? Suddenly, Fauci, who had just said a few weeks earlier that no one should be wearing a mask, all the same reasons I just gave you, and that they don't necessary, you don't need them, blah, blah. Suddenly, science has to support politics. So science in service of policy. Remember that phrase, science in service of policy. Suddenly, the head of the CDC, Fauci, the top doctor there, and then Redfield from the CDC, the WHO actually said, no, don't do it. They were the last holdout. Suddenly they came out and announced, well, due to anecdotal evidence, we're now reversing our thing. They had to, because they had to go in line with what the political class was doing. So science and support of policy. And you don't even need studies. You just need a science bureaucrat, unelected, who's been there for decades, to come out and say masks now work and we should be doing that. Suddenly, the media, the science is settled. The head of the CDC came out and said it. No, so they come out with modeling studies and then correlation studies. Suddenly, they put in masks, and now that we've had the mask study, the deaths are way down. No, the deaths were way down before you put the mask. So those are two examples. We are losing our free so rapidly. We're losing this battle because very few people, no one in power, even Donald Trump is not speaking out about this. Few congressmen get it and are speaking out. Even Republican governors, let's trash some people. But Texas governor, Florida governor has been very strong mostly, but weak. The Georgia governor has been very good. He actually banned local mask mandates on the lockdowns. But tell me anywhere in the country, maybe I'm wrong, Scott, has anywhere in the country voted for a lockdown by legislator, or has it all been executive orders or public health directives declaring an emergency? We have to question these. There's a guy named Sanjeev, I can't remember the butcher's name, but he's an economist in Australia.
Yeah.
And he said that Sweden is different. It's in their constitution that you cannot declare a public health emergency and then take away people's freedoms. The United States lacks it. We allow this. We cannot allow this ever again. So this is what we're facing. And now the climate activists are drooling in jealousy. So that's how Climate Hustle 2 opens up.
Well, there was one today, Vine is her last name, and she retweeted a questionnaire on how people were rating topics that were important to them as they lead up to the election. And climate out of 20 was now 17. And you could see her distraughtness, how the rug had been pulled out from under her, that her cause, in her eyes, because time is this short, was lost. That we'd been drawn into these other issues, and the juice. As soon as COVID came up, Greta became a non-existent culture creature.
Well, she also became a COVID expert. She was featured on a panel on CNN. Keep in mind, here's what John Kerry said: the solutions to COVID and climate are basically one and the same. And that's why they're so excited. They want to keep this going because this is what they've been achieving. And hell, if we have to use a virus to keep the momentum going, let's do it. So that's where we are. And this is a grave time for me because here's another point. Had Donald Trump not been president, he allowed Fauci to come in and do this. Imagine if Hillary had won and Hillary tried to do this. I think we would have had partisanship. We would have had a loyal opposition in Washington. You would have had more pushback. But because Donald Trump was president, Republicans are generally silent. It's sort of the Nixon in China moment. Only Nixon could have normalized relationships because had a Democrat done it, Republicans never would have allowed it. Well, it's the same thing here. Only Trump could have elevated Fauci. So in that sense, I'm not saying Hillary should have won, but I'm saying that's a weird view of politics, is that when partisanship can actually help defend liberty sometimes. When Bill Clinton was president in the late 90s, I think we had our greatest time as a country in many decades because Bill Clinton was held in check by the Republican Congress in ways that when George W. Bush was elected, he wasn't. So we actually had balanced budgets. We had cheap gas. We had a government that was obsessed with a sex scandal. That's a good thing. You want government wasting its time worried about a sex scandal and not declaring health emergencies, climate emergencies, and coming up with all this. So I look back at Bill Clinton's second term as the halcyon days of freedom and liberty. How about that?
That was Barbra Streisand's Happy Days Are Here Again.
Yes.
Yeah. So really, the whole CO2, all of this, becomes not even in the backseat issue, this whole climate change, even if from what I'm seeing as an event with the sun, that ultimately we see, and the pause has taken place. We're 20 plus, maybe even 25 years now where we haven't seen, outside of adjusted, homogenized, tweaked data, an increase in temperature. And if we do go through a climate crisis, then I see us as going the other way. That government is always pointing there when in reality, the threat lies behind.
Well, no one even knows. Donald Trump, during the wildfires, actually came out and said, you don't know. Science doesn't know. It may cool. And then the media went, oh my God, go to climatedepot.com. I did a whole rebuttal. There are so many scientists based on low sunspot activity, solar cycles, ocean cycles, and other things we're also geologically overdue for the next ice age. In fact, Bill Nye says one thing rising CO2 emissions may have done is delay the next ice age. Well, gee, if that's true, isn't that a good thing?
When has
Donald Trump was absolutely right. Science doesn't know. But let me give you you asked a couple times about CO2 where we've referenced it. Carbon dioxide is but one of hundreds of factors in the climate. And the idea that it's the control knob is not scientifically valid. The way the United Nations gets away with this, first of all, they handpick all their scientists. They were formed in 1988, the climate panel. And the idea was they are going to examine how CO2 influences the climate. If they fail to find CO2 causing a climate crisis, they fail to have a reason to exist. Yep. So guess what? As a bonus, so in the movie, we talk about the scientists who talk, it's almost like a magician with a card trick. They talk about, it looks like they're doing real science, but they know exactly where every card needs to be at the right time. And we actually document it in my book too. The UN officials saying, wait till the next report. It'll be so alarming. The world will have to act. The head of the UN, former head, Rajendra Pachauri, actually said, global warming is my religion. Does that sound like a science body to you? He was the head of the climate panel. Al Gore admitted, and I believe it was a CNN interview in 2000, maybe 17 or 18. He said, of course, the United Nations reports are torqued up. How else are you going to get the attention of policymakers? So it's a lobbying organization, but it's not just like, okay, we're put together. They have no reason. If they fail to find CO2 as a crisis, they have to disband, right? So they have every incentive to keep it going. But here's the kicker. Not only are they tasked with finding the problem that CO2 is causing a crisis and hyping it and distorting the science, but as a bonus, they get to come up with a solution. The whole UN treaty process, they get to collect the $100 billion a year climate fund. They get to do the green development fund. They get to have annual conferences. So they get to do the problem and the solution. Do you sense a conflict of interest here? Do you think any media outlet would ever question that in the mainstream? So this is the insanity we're dealing with. So in the film Climate SL2, we show that in the geologic history of the Earth, we've had ice ages that, with CO2 many times higher. We've had CO2 levels that we're in the lowest, geologically speaking, we're in the lowest 10% of the Earth's
history. We called it a famine, a CO2 famine.
Yeah, CO2 famine, but the Earth in 90% of the history has been colder and CO2 higher. So the idea that somehow we're in an unprecedented geologic era of CO2 isn't adding up. And we go through hurricanes, floods, tornadoes, sea level, wildfires, I don't even know what else, what are droughts. And not only are not increasing on climate timescales, 50 to 100 years, they're actually decreasing. In the case of wildfires, which everyone's talking about, globally, wildfires are down 80, 90% over 100 years. Globally, in the last less than 20 years, 18 years, the satellite data shows wildfires are declining. So yeah, California's having some bad wildfires right now, but they even don't dwarf what they've had in centuries past. They've had droughts that have lasted more than a century in the history of California, going back hundreds of years. I mean, California is drought prone, but beyond that, this is obviously California droughts. I mean, wildfires are not a good indication of climate signal because it's so dependent on land use, forest clearing, arson. All these fires are started by arson, and the rest are started, not arson, but by humans, by accident. And then the rest are started by lightning. So, I mean, there is no there. So what they do is they do a misdirect. Current reality fails to alarm. This is a great example with polar bears. At or near historic population highs. They've never estimated this many highs. They're supposed to be at a catastrophe. Al Gore, after making it the poster child in 2006 in his Academy Award-winning film and Nobel Prize winner, guess what? His sequel in 2017, not one mention of the polar bear. Not one mention in his book. Why? Because they're at a historic population high. So what do? They'll still say, though, it's worse than we thought for the polar bear. How? Their numbers have gone up. Well, because our predictions of 50 years are now much more dire than they were just 5 years ago. So it's a misdirect. When current reality fails to alarm, make scarier and scarier predictions of the alleged bad effects of CO2.
And that's why we have scientists right now to come up with a butterfly study, or what do you call it now? We have opposite and contradictory publications in peer-reviewed studies, or hot versus cold.
It is phenomenal to look at that. I mean, there's no way to falsify global warming. If you're going to bet on two teams to win the Super Bowl and you bet on both, guess what? You can come in and say, hey, I got it right. They do an ensemble, a suite of climate models, and they will claim, here's a model here. We predicted it. It's like, yeah, if you're a magician or something, you can always show, if you show all 52 cards and someone says that's the one, you say, there, I predicted it. Yeah. They don't show you how 90% of their models are failing, but meanwhile, they'll show you the one, we predicted it. Yeah, well, they do the same thing with the studies. The length of day will increase, decrease. Hurricanes will increase, decrease. The fog in San Francisco will increase, decrease. I go through in the book and in the movie, in Climate Hustle 1, we had the whole thing just going through each one. And I'll show you the news source. When I give speeches around the country, I show the actual original headlines. Global warming will cause this. Global warming will cause opposite. Global warming will cause more snow. Global warming will cause less snow. That's a classic one. Yeah. So what happened there is, when we had record snow, the East Coast had record blizzards and snow. Al Gore said, this is what we saw. This is what global warming looks like. And the first film never mentioned that. In fact, he talked about the snows disappearing. So it's amazing how they just get away with it. And the media will never challenge it because this is the chosen science and issue of our day right now.
What do you think of the president kind of shuffling the leadership and say Ryan Mao getting in as the chief scientist for NOAA?
We have David Gates too coming in. Ryan Mao, I don't know that you could call him a climate skeptic. I'm skeptical that he's a skeptic.
I've followed him for probably 3 years. And
he's very good on extreme weather, but I'm not sure what his views are overall. He's sort of, he's done some stuff where Michael Mann has been praising him, and I don't know if he's very confusing at times to figure out. I don't know. He's not like a skeptic that you could say is a classic climate skeptic who rejects it, but he might be a anti-catastrophist climate skeptic. He certainly focuses on extreme weather. We'll see what happens. I'm not sure, but David Gates, he's featured in our film. He's the new one they're considering for a NOAA top science. I don't know exactly what position yet, but it's been in the news. David Gates, climatologist in Delaware. He's profiled. He was actually the state climatologist in Delaware, but because of his skeptical views, they basically tried to force him out. The governor. I mean, there's a big everywhere you step on this consensus, you're destroyed. But Trump is doing stuff, but it's frustrating. It's 4 years in. He's finally, 6 weeks before an election, you're finally putting people in. He had an opportunity. He had Will Happer, the Princeton physicist, 200 peer-reviewed studies, considered one of the foremost experts on the greenhouse effect. He was all prepared to do a climate committee and challenge the United Nations consensus, bring in dozens of top-tier scientists. And what happened was Donald Trump approved it, but what happens? Here's the problem that Trump doesn't understand. Trump's a former, Trump Enterprises CEO. They come in, Trump okays the climate commission. Then he comes in. I thought we approved that months later. No. Unless he really wants it and follows up, his staff is going to push it off. They see climate change, challenging the science, is like a Vietnam War quagmire. Donald Trump doesn't want troops in Afghanistan. He's been talking about it for 4 years. Still there. The Pentagon's never going to let that go. That's something, if Donald Trump really wants to follow through, he's this deep state, whatever you want to call it, will never allow that to happen. And it's the same thing, with climate and a certain couple other issues that Donald Trump deals with. So his intentions are in the right place, but he doesn't even realize, you can't go in and say, oh yeah, we're going to do a commission. Yeah, I'll okay that. No, unless he's going to personally follow up and make it happen, it was never going to happen. So Will Happer left the administration frustrated. It was the greatest missed opportunity of the Trump administration, because here's what the problem with President Trump. He's come in fantastically. Regulatory, repealed Obama's climate regulations, pro-energy. We've achieved energy dominance. I quote in my new book, going back to the 1950s, we haven't had this since Eisenhower was president, this kind of energy dominance we had under President Trump. But not a single cabinet member, bar one, a guy named Scott Pruitt, his first EPA chief, would challenge the science. Rick Perry, who everyone thought, oh, he's a great climate skeptic. He comes in and then starts praising Al Gore, decides never to challenge the science. It actually ends up being, well, I don't care if we're in the UN Paris Agreement. Rick Perry, NASA head Bridenstine, comes in the Trump administration, brings Bill Nye to the first State of the Union, and then right before he's confirmed, announces he's reversed himself. He's no longer a climate skeptic, a former congressman. So he bows out. State Department, we have the first one was Rex Tillerson. Not only does he not bow out, he goes to the Arctic and signs a UN declaration. He supports carbon taxes. He's got the whole Exxon. I mean, people always ask me, are you funded by ExxonMobil? Like, why the F would I be funded by ExxonMobil? They support UN Paris Agreement. They support carbon taxes. They support all the bullshit you hear. What in the world would they want to fund me for? They've never given me a dime or a cent. Instead, they gave $100+ million to Stanford University to study global warming. But the Union of Concerned Scientists says $19 million went to climate skeptic groups from the early 90s to early 2000s and the evil Exxon plan. So what? One United States Department of Agriculture farm grant to study how farm odors contribute to global warming exceeded all the money ExxonMobil was ever accused of giving over a decade and a half. Bullshit narrative. And then they do a movie, Merchants of Doubt, how the oil industry and all nonsense. But anyway, so no one in the Trump administration will challenge it. Scott Pruitt, his first EPA director, stands up. What happens to Scott Pruitt? He goes on TV, challenges the UN, IPCC. He's phenomenal. He got a bed and breakfast below market rates. He asked for someone to help his wife open a Chick-fil-A. Stuff that no other cabinet member in history of Washington was scrutinized like Scott Pruitt. Plus, his own career staff at EPA went after him. He's run out of town after the first year, and this is what it made an example of. And no Trump cabinet member will make it. So here's my larger point: because Trump has come in, Trump himself is great, gives always great comments, but he doesn't really get deeply into it. But he did great. He done 60 Minutes. He always defends climate skepticism. He's a true climate skeptic. The problem is, we have the most skeptical president who doesn't push back. His administration doesn't push back on bupkis when it comes to the science. And what I mean by that is they're still accepting UN reports, still funding the UN. The National Climate Assessment was an abomination of science that came through. Guess who were the lead authors of this report? It came out in 2018, I believe. Catherine Hayhoe, Don Wobbles. These are activists with the Union of Concerned Scientists, far left environmental group. And guess what else they did? They used discredited extreme model scenarios that to come up with dire consequences if the world doesn't act. In other words, what used to be an outlier prediction, they'd give a whole suite of predictions, now became the new mainstream one. And it was embraced by this, and it was pre-planned. This was like activists and the activist scientists. So guess what the media reported this? Trump's own scientists disagree with him. I'm sorry, unless Trump's own scientists include, Greenpeace activists and Union of Concerned Scientists, these weren't Trump's own scientists. The problem was every single cabinet member could have challenged the report, but they were afraid, the cabinet heads, because they didn't want to be seen as censoring the federal climate report. So in that regard, I think Trump has hurt climate skepticism because we have the most skeptical president who hasn't pushed back at all. And the public now sort of not know what to think. There's no real pushback. The policies are great, so there's no pushback. And this is the problem I think we have going forward. I'm not optimistic, in case you haven't been able to tell, because now they have COVID, climate, they have lockdown presidents, they have a compliant public in the UK House of Commons. I want to move to Sweden. That's what I'd like to do, where they're anti-lockdown and have it in their constitution where they can. That's where we're stuck now. Who would have thought Sweden would be the haven for liberty-loving people everywhere?
So it's not like a solution. I always envisioned maybe like a cryptocurrency to where all of the scientists and all of the models had to open their guts. The models have to be open source so everybody can see what data goes into these models. Because if this is truly a crisis, a global crisis, then why haven't we had this unity? And instead of having, this is my study, this is your study, these are my tree rings, this is my data. Why can't it all come into one massive data dump, and then we can sift through it, develop a proper and appropriate model, and then as a planet face whatever is coming? Maybe that's just a bridge too far.
No, it's a bridge way too far. And by the way, the best peer review at this point is the internet, is the, scientists report. We had Michael Mann's hockey stick that came out in 2001. Well, I believe it was 2001 UN report is where they highlighted it. And this claimed, temperatures were unprecedented. Well, we had scientists and statisticians start looking into this, and they were able to lay waste outside of the peer review process. People who did it, Michael Mann, wouldn't release the data. No. Patrick Michaels, a climatologist, former head of the State Climatologists Association, talks openly about him asking for data from some of these extraordinary claims in climate. And the scientists actually say, why should I give it to you? You just want to find something wrong with it.
Yeah, of
That's the mentality. This isn't about science. It's about crafting a narrative. The ClimateGate scandal, 2009.
That's where I wanted to go.
Yeah, they literally were, beside trying to avoid Freedom of Information Act requests and threatening journal editors, they literally were exposed as just crafting a narrative. It was essentially like a political party crafting a message, but they didn't allow dissent. They had to stay on message, and they kicked everyone out. In fact, there's scientists who are like, well, I went to a solar conference and none of the scientists are there with us. We have to make sure that, they don't get essentially any attention. I have a whole chapter in my book on this. We talk about it in the first movie, Climate Hustle 1, and the second movie, Climate Hustle 2. This was the scandal because it showed that the top leadership of the United Nations was engaged in very bad behavior and were running essentially a campaign cause. Anyone who goes around who actually thinks the UN IPCC is science, I'm sorry, you either have not looked into it or you're a propagandist yourself. There is no way you could, and I'm talking about, if you look at, we interviewed scientists who say like they would actually sit around the table and say, how can we make the report so alarming? It's just incredible. They're handpicked scientists from around the world to toe the line. And here's the kicker. The reports, summary for policymakers, they get all the splash in the media, have to be agreed upon, not only by scientists, but by the UN bureaucrats and politicians. And the underlying science reports have to be in agreement with the predetermined political one. And this is actually reported by the Associated Press. Go into this in my book in detail. This is how they craft the consensus. This is how the science is made. The 97% consensus in one of the surveys wasn't even 97 scientists. It was 77 anonymous scientists. Richard Toll, who looked at another 97%, said that none of the numbers that they claim are supported in the underlying data. He said it's literally the 97% consensus is pulled from thin air. So we are being conned. And actually, to use another word, we're being hustled. So just in wrapping up here, the film goes through all of this agenda. It's climatehustle2.com, September 24th, Thursday night, 8 p.m. You go there, you can watch it live. We have Kevin Sorbo narrating it. I think people will be entertained. We go through the Hollywood hypocrisy, the children. We didn't even talk about that. The indoctrination of kids and the recruiting of kids for these lawsuits going after the federal government. And the idea here is kids are suing the government to safeguard their future. They're in a backdoor way trying to get through judicial fiat the Green New Deal imposed on us if they fail in the legislature. Now think, before you dismiss that, most of the progressives have had major advances, progressive movements through the court system, not the legislature. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that a bad Supreme Court federal judges are going to help start forcing the Green New Deal, because without the Green New Deal, these kids, as in the words of Greta Thunberg, have a future that is no more. What's the point of going to school if, we have a future that's no more? The top scientists, I'm quoting Greta, the top scientists of the UN have told us that we have to do this action or we're doomed, and then they go the tipping points.
Who is Greta? That's a whole nother thing. Is Greta? Yeah, that's a nuts. Yeah. No. Well, we agreed on like 25 minutes, Mark.
I don't know what was in this. This is a cigar vape, by the way. I'm not sure what was in it, but it got me pretty wound up. No, it's just it's a regular cigar vape. Nothing's in it.
Well, no, this is a topic that COVID. You're right. COVID completely blew it out of the water. This was going to be the prison that we were all corralled in because we're all CO2 offenders. Yeah. Every single breath is a CO2 offender. And despite the plants in the house, outside, that is an essential nutrient for the plants.
Yeah.
And there was another article I was reading just today where somebody, it was lambasting Ryan Mao, and where he falsely or inaccurately claimed that CO2 being good for plants.
I mean, NASA did a study, the greening of planet Earth. Yeah. You know how they spin that, by the way? They don't come out and say the planet Earth is getting greener. They come out and say poison ivy is going to be a lot worse. Poison ivy is worse. So they pick a weed and then they make it sound like it's all bad. I mean, it's just obviously, here's a good example that I can leave you with. In the first film, Climate Hustle, which, by the way, we're offering a bundle package for Climate Hustle 1 and 2. The first one deals more with science. This is more about the agenda. The lowly armadillo. This is a classic example. In the 1970s global cooling scare, they warned that it was getting so cold the armadillo was being forced south. Well, guess what? Now the same climate action, actually the same network, ABC News, is warning that the armadillo is getting so hot that the armadillo is being forced north. This is called climate cycles. And they go cold, they go warm. In fact, if you go back to the 1920s and 30s, the Arctic had very similar temperatures that they had today. And the cycle goes warm and cold. And people say, well, we've been warming. Yeah, we've warmed since 1850, the height of the Little Ice Age, when New York Harbor froze over, when the Thames River froze over. So you can go back to the Roman warming period and you say the temperatures were similar. We may have cooled for them. There's actually peer-reviewed studies showing that. So this is just
they like to start charts in like 1880, 1850, and then go up from there.
Okay, here's the bullshit the TV weathermen get into. There's this group called, it's a Soros-funded group. And by the way, that's anti-Semitic if you say Soros-funded now, apparently. Even Fox News is saying that. So, but there's a group out that starts a baseline in 1970. And they go out, they give it to TV meteorologists, and they say, whether you're in Iowa or Kansas or California or Colorado or Massachusetts, your local weatherman gets a little prepackaged bullshit thing that says, our local temperatures have increased this much since 1970. Climate models predict if this rate were to continue, will be this warm by 2030, 2050. Here's the problem. The baseline of that is the height of the 1970s global cooling scare, one of the cooler periods of the 20th century. So they pick a cool period, cherry pick. And had they picked the 1930s, you would show no trend or possibly a cooling trend since the 1930s. But then it's kind of like saying, well, if this trend continues, well, if you have a 10-year-old kid and you say if their growth rate continues, by the time they're 20, they're going to be 30 feet tall. But this is pure propaganda. We are losing because no one in power is pushing back on this. Yeah. Same with COVID, same with climate. Donald Trump, again, great deregulator, but he's not great with his administration has not been great in pushing back on this. So that's why I'm very pessimistic. My hope is that we have a climate electoral shock this November. That, for instance, the new North Carolina governor is up. He's a Democrat. I went to North Carolina vacation this summer. Movie theaters and gyms are still closed. I found an illegal gym to go to. F the governor. It was like going into a speakeasy. You had to go in, and we were totally in violation of the governor's health orders. And they were just trying to keep businesses open. But I'm hoping in states like that where governors who are pro-lockdown, I'm hoping for an electoral shock in November that these governors get ousted. That's the only way this ends. Otherwise, if it doesn't end, I'm not talking about the national race at all. I'm talking about governors' races, legislators, where this is an issue. We need a speak, because if we don't end the lockdowns for COVID, we're doomed when it comes to climate.
Yeah, this is going to be a bad 10, 15 years coming up. If
I don't know that we're recover. I mean, this is the natural progression of things. I mean, you can go back to Roosevelt's New Deal, then Great Society, no matter what era, every president who's assumed office, America has moved further to the left. Now, there was a blip with Ronald Reagan, but by the end of his second term, we started undoing, and certainly by Bush's first, the massive increased spending, government regulation. And then we had a blip with the Republican Congress. George W. Bush massively increased the size of government. 9/11 helped with that.
Oh, boy.
And then, of course, we had Obama. And then Donald Trump. The other big problem is he doesn't care about spending, size of government, really, deficits, debt. And, of course, so we're just, in that area, we're just bombed off the charts. Yeah. So you add all that up, I can't be optimistic. I'm sorry to end on a pessimistic note. Now, the movie ends on an optimistic note because it's all about resisting. As long as we're out there resisting, we can fight this, but it's just I don't see. Let's put it this way: if the 2020 election goes and the North Carolina governor's elected and other governors elect, then I don't know what to tell you. If people aren't motivated to get out and stop a technocracy where the unelected few bureaucrats who you don't even know their names never voted for. Have they suspended democracy, and they're able to shut you in your house by declaring a health emergency that no one knows where it came from. And now in Virginia, where I live, our health director, I don't even know his name, but guess what? I know what he said, that when the vaccine is available, it's going to be mandated. no health exemption, no religious exemption. Everyone's going to have to take it for a virus that, if you're under 75, has a death rate. If you're under, young people have much better chance of surviving the COVID than they do the flu. It's mostly deadly to people with pre-existing conditions. So this is what we're facing, but it's all about this a mentality. They have fear. If they have fear, they have you. And if I don't know, in social media, these doctors speak out, they're immediately silenced, banned. Our movie Climate Hustle 2 been banned on the Twitter.
There it is.
We have Amazon Prime. Once we started talking about the sequel, getting it on, we had our first film, Climate Hustle, on Amazon Prime. They pulled it off Amazon Prime and they refused to run Climate Hustle 2. This despite the fact we were scheduled for almost 800 theaters before COVID hit. So they own all the social media. You have all the CEOs, corporations, Major League Sports, all just bow to 20-something-year-old woke, individuals. We're all on college campus now. We're all getting the bullshit daily, and we're all getting the socialist stuff. So where is the organized opposition in government? If Donald Trump is our best hope, but he doesn't surround himself, I'm not optimistic about his administration, because he orders stuff. He approves it. He okays it. But in certain things, it's never going to happen unless he's made aware that he's got to follow through 100 times and make it happen. And it's almost impossible for him to do. He's pulling.
It would be helpful if he was more articulate. If he could get in front of the podium and he is the best.
Great. You can't ask for better. I would take Donald Trump, warts and all. He's my favorite president of my lifetime. I'm sorry. Anyone who's that in your face to these nasty bastards in the media, I support fully. He can do no wrong ultimately, but his administration can do a lot of wrong and has missed many opportunities. Yeah.
It's interesting how Obama shut down. I guess that's exactly what happened when Ebola was becoming an issue in 2014. They just mandated that the press didn't talk about it. And
they stopped the testing. If you don't have the whole other thing is what's going on in New Zealand is psychotically insane. There you go. Morano quotable. They are trying to zero out cases. Well, wait a minute. Do they not read the New York Times? All the false positive? These tests are detecting levels of viral load that aren't even transmittable. Fauci. But it doesn't matter. It's an insanity. It's a mindset. They have the public. The fact that there's not just outright rioting and overthrow. I mean, we need to see Tiananmen squares in every country that's going along with this. Yep. I'm so disappointed. I don't wear a mask as much as possible. I was forced to in an airplane. I'm forced to in a casino when I gave a speech in Vegas because they throw you out, armed guards. But if I go in a Walmart or if I go in a small mom and pop, I'll ask, do you mind? If I go in an Uber, I always ask, do you care if I wear a mask? I've had one Uber driver tell me, oh, yeah, please wear it. Otherwise, they don't care. And the driver usually takes off their mask. It's just, unless people start, I go into Walmart, I do health exemption. Oh, yeah, it's despicable if you're not, it's not despicable. A health exemption against unjust government is damn recommended, and I encourage everyone to do it. I've done it publicly. By the way, for my efforts, NASA's lead global warming scientist, Dr. Gavin Schmidt, the man who came out and supported a carbon tax, the man whose predecessor got arrested half a dozen times protesting global warming. Any idiot out there who thinks, well, NASA is just passionately looking at the science. Bullshit. Former NASA scientists who put men on the moon have formed a coalition called The Right Stuff, disgusted with what's happening at NASA, both under Hansen, his predecessor, and now Gavin Schmidt. But I've been called just the last 2 weeks a sociopath by NASA's lead global warming scientist by name. And he also said, as are most climate deniers, sociopaths. So that's what NASA's Gavin Schmidt, the lead global warming scientist, thinks of anyone who challenges the climate narrative. That's what we're up against.
Wow. Well,
we deserve it. I'm sorry.
Because we've allowed it to happen.
Californians deserve it. Yep. People in Massachusetts. I live in Virginia. I don't know if we deserve it or not. But the fact is, we're not rebelling enough. So, it's hard for me to even get upset anymore. We deserve the government that we're getting, and it's only going to get worse unless we fight back. And we can't rely on anyone in power. Republicans are pathetic.
It's unfortunate because they've had an opportunity. They've had the White House to organize, to really organize. They've really got this fired up base, and it feels like it just is lacking a direction. And whatever direction is happening is coming from an anonymous channel on the internet. Yeah. So I hope it's not a wasted opportunity.
I don't know, but I mentioned one other point about, even people like Rand Paul. He had a one-on-one with Fauci. He was weak. He was weak. I mean, you need to go through and go, they never had these recommendations before. Things change on a dime. The mask mandates, the lockdowns, science and support of policy. Science and support of policy. Just don't forget that. Technocracy, that's where we're headed. And it's frightening that we're going to give up elected government in order to be safe by an unelected bureaucracy. They are know best. And it's the same whether you're climate or not. The idea is you can't have an internal combustion. You can't put your thermostat there. You can't eat meat. You can't travel like that. You can't have a house unless it's built by, to be net zero. You can't have an economy that allows that. You can't have coal plants. You can't have fracking. You can't have SUVs. We have experts with PhDs who study their life, and they're going to tell you you are doing it wrong. You are the unwashed masses, and we got to get you under control. How dare you, as John Holtzman said in 1975, you get in your car and drive and buy a six-pack of beer and drive home. That is wasteful and inefficient, and by golly, we're going to stop you because we have higher concerns, and we're smarter than you. We're experts. We've spent our lives. How can you not take our word? We are the ones declaring a public health emergency. It's for your own safety. We're screwed, and we deserve it.
And that is how you weaponize weather.
Weaponize weather. All right. I got way off track, but it's climatehustle2.com. Be optimistic, even though I've given you bupkis reasons to be optimistic. I think you'll be entertained. We have a lot of fun. We have an NYU professor who actually wants to shrink humans genetically to lower carbon footprints, give them a meat patch in order to have them stop eating meat. So anyway, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And I'm sure your audience is probably like, what nut did you get tonight?
Oh, they listen to me, so we're not too far apart. I'm a little quieter in my ranting.
Okay. I'm just fired up because I'm just so disappointed in people who should know better in power that have allowed these lockdowns, and then to see the climate activists lusting after this kind of thing. I mean, we're deep. This is bad, bad, bad. So thank you very much.
I don't want to say fatally damage the economy, but this nation is going to take a long time to recover from this. Even if we do get off oil, if even magically some Tesla technology shows up and we do go electric and we can put CO2 behind us, but still the task of regaining our freedoms will lie ahead. And that's the challenge ahead of us, regardless of what energy we end up using. How do we regain our freedom? What kind of revolution must we go through so that there is a new George Washington on the other side of this 250-year experience?
I don't know. Yeah, I'll leave you one quick thing. COVID climate connection. In May, after seeing how emotional these daily death tolls were, even though, over half have been in nursing homes and the age and a lot of it has to do with bad policy, sending nursing home residents back and the most vulnerable back in with the virus. A whole coalition of academics, and I write about this at Climate Depot, you can look it up, death certificate. They want to now add climate change onto the death certificate. Now, think about this. Let me give you 3 examples. Al Gore has said publicly that every organ in your body is affected by climate change. The American Cancer Society did a study saying that climate change worsens cancer, and I'm not making that up. The Department of Transportation came out with a study that said fatal car accidents could be increasing due to global warming. So if you die from organ failure, cancer, or in a car accident, guess what could be a contributing factor listed on your death certificate if this goes through? Climate change. And guess what?
Comorbidity.
Imagine MSNBC and CNBC every night. The climate change death toll increases and government still is not acting. Another 400 people. We're at 100,000 deaths globally. In the U.S. today, that toll continues. They see what happened with the COVID. They want in on the fear. I don't think climate will ever be able to stand alone again, or at least not for a long time. I think they're going to just latch on to the climate fears now. So
not after you're done.
This is where we are.
When you're done with it, people will look at it in a completely different way, Mark. And we combat climate change by putting on a jacket.
A jacket? Oh, right. Or take it off.
Otherwise, he froze to death. Climate change.
Yes. Yeah. That's exactly right. All right. Well, thank you so much.
You, Mark. Take care. All the best. Good luck tomorrow with the launch. I'll be there.
All right. Thank you so much. Appreciate it, Scott.
Take care, man.
Thank you. All right.
Marc Morano, everybody. what a firecracker. And I appreciate him spending some time with us tonight to talk about this issue from his perspective. And he's certainly been in the game easily as long as I have, but with a very different crowd. And I appreciate him taking some time out of his late Wednesday evening in Virginia to talk with us, to share his opinions. So I hope you enjoyed that. And I'll be back on Monday with another perspective. We'll see what the universe drops in our lap for that point in time. Otherwise, I'll catch you tomorrow evening on a look at weather. And thanks for coming on in here and commenting. Yeah, that broad term, Casey, that is absolutely ridiculous because they couldn't keep the warming up. And eventually, the truth, once it's set free, will just straighten it all out. It might take a little bit, but ultimately, it'll happen. All right. Thanks once again for stopping by, and I'll catch you tomorrow with Scott's weather at 5 o'clock Mountain. And until then, have a great night, everybody, and keep looking up.